I feel like God has instructed me to do this. So I want to start off by reading some scriptures, some very, very important scriptures. In fact, I'm going to read 3 passages. And I believe that these 3 passages are 3 of the most important passages in the entire Bible, especially when it comes to biblical guidance and instructions for how we should behave, how we should act as members of the body of Christ. And so I really feel like I'm supposed to start with these scriptures before we get into the topic today. So here we go. All right, so this first one, this is in Matthew 22. Hearing that Jesus had silenced the Sadducees, the Pharisees got together. So everybody knows, this is the religious leaders of the day. One of them, an expert of the law, tested him with this question. So let me set the stage here for you. I'm sure everybody watching this already knows, but just in case you don't. So Jesus, the religious leaders of Jesus's day were the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and they were always coming at Jesus, trying to test him, trying to catch him saying something wrong. They were always plotting to try to figure out how to kill him. And so they were always coming at him with these little tests, these little questions, these accusing questions. So this is what's happening right here. So Jesus had already won this little battle with the Sadducees. So the Pharisees are trying next. So one of them, an expert in the law, tested him with this question: Teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the law? Jesus replied, love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it: love your neighbor as yourself. All the law and the prophets hang on these 2 commandments. So when somebody asked Jesus, what is the most important thing, Jesus? He didn't say, oh, you got to have your doctrine exactly correct. You got to have every tiny little bit of your belief system has to be exactly correct. He didn't say that. He didn't say, oh, you got to believe in the rapture. So those of you who are with me the last several weeks for my end time series, you know what I'm talking about. He didn't say any of those things. He said love. He said the most important thing is love. Love God and love your neighbor as yourself. And then somebody asked him, Jesus, well, who is my neighbor? You know, they're trying to see if there's any loopholes here. And so how he responded by telling the parable of the Good Samaritan. Now, I'm not going to tell you that whole I'm not going to read that passage because probably most of us know this parable. So I'm just going to summarize it. So the parable of the Good Samaritan, there was this man who was traveling, and he was attacked by these thieves and injured and left injured, bleeding at the side of the road out in the wilderness. All right. And then the first 2 people who walked by were these 2 religious leaders. They were probably a Sadducee and a Pharisee. And what did they do? Did they stop and help this poor man who was laying by the side of the road, injured and bleeding? No, they did not. Here's what they did. They both walked to the other side of the road and kept walking and acted like they didn't see him. So then a 3rd man came by, and this happened to be a Samaritan, and he responded completely differently. He stopped and he helped treated the man's wounds. He picked him up and took him to the closest town and left him at a place where he would be cared for. And then he used his own money to pay for the man's care. And before he left, he even said, okay, if you need more than this, I will come back. I'm going to make sure that he is completely cared for. So Jesus told this story, and he made sure to make a big point that the good guy in this story was the Samaritan. And the reason why Jesus used a Samaritan as the good guy in the story is because the Samaritans were the people that the Jews hated. This was like their version of racism, I guess. They did not like the Samaritan people. They did not even consider them as human beings. They considered them more like dogs. It was a very, very terrible, terrible way that they viewed these Samaritan people. Well, Jesus knew that. And so that is why Jesus, in his story, made the good guy, the Samaritan, the guy that the Jews hated. So because his message was this: who is your neighbor? Well, after he told the story, then he asked the guys that were listening, who, was a Samaritan, the Pharisees and the Sadducees. So who was the neighbor in this story? Jesus asked them. And so they had to answer. They're like, well, I guess it was the Samaritan. Bingo, that is right. And so Jesus's point was that everybody's your neighbor, not just the people that you like, not just the people that you respect, but these people down the street that you hate. These are your neighbors. These people you can't stand over there. These are your neighbors. Everybody's your neighbor. So that is how Jesus responded.